Welcome to episode 70 of Stageworthy. I'm your host, Phil Rickaby. Stageworthy is a podcast featuring conversations in Canadian theatre with actors, directors, playwrights, and more. You can find Stageworthy on Facebook and Twitter at StageworthyPod, and you can find the website at stageworthypodcast.com. If you like the podcast, I hope you'll consider leaving a comment or rating on iTunes or Google Music or whatever podcast app you use. Comments really help people find the show. My guest this week is Siobhan Richardson. Siobhan is an actor, singer, and dancer, as well as a fight choreographer and intimacy director. Siobhan returns to Stageworthy to talk about the work of Intimacy Directors International and the importance of bringing an intimacy director into the rehearsal hall.
To spend the time on it, yeah.
Otherwise, it's always like, oh, I could do this, but then this is making me money, and this is making, all these other things.
Or these other things, like it's not making me money now, but maybe the potential is for it to be a connection, as opposed to going, this isn't making me money now, but it will mean that I can be in a position to do these other gigs because I will be ready.
Yeah.
I will be, and I'm doing something I love, so I'm in a better place to begin with.
Yeah. Have you found that there are people who are watching regularly, or do you know what your viewership is like on it?
Yeah, there's certain time periods, especially part of what I've been doing this first bit is trying out different periods of time to see who I get when. And so I have a couple people who are regular kind of no matter what time I'm on. Sometimes it's just they're usually free on a particular day, so I see them then. But because of time zones, because Pocket Live is releasing all around the world, so some people are like, in the evening, it's first thing in the morning for them because they're in the Philippines or they're on that side of the globe.
Is Pocket Live only live? Like, is there an archive of it?
There's an archive of it. Apparently the plan is for it to only have like 3 or 4 broadcasts on it, but at the moment it's archiving them all. So I actually had to go do a big purge at one point, and now that it looks like I had no lag today, so I will go through and I'll just eliminate a bunch of the old ones because I don't want to have laggy stuff in there. Even though some of the content is a lot of fun on some of them, I'm just going to reduce it to just a few.
Yeah. Well, it's hard when there's like lag because then you're like, if somebody comes along and sees this, what's their reaction to this laggy thing going to be?
Yeah, how does that represent the work I'm doing? And because it shows how much effort am I putting into it? How professional is, just like anything else, how professional is my presentation?
So what are the things that you're doing, like a warm-up? You're doing some physio each day?
I do, and it depends on what else is going on. So like during Dan Cox Dance, I only had like 2 pockets on every day that I could do. So I did some physio and warm-up stuff, which is also maintenance for another project that I'm working on. And then in the evening, I would do some reading out of the Degrassi treatise, which was translated into English 30 years after it was originally written. So it's still in the Renaissance.
See, for a second there, you said Degrassi, and I was thinking like either the Degrassi Street in Toronto or the Degrassi Sisters, which is I have Upper Canada Rebellion on the brain. So
neat! Isn't that fun? I wonder what kind of weird play or what weird script would include the Renaissance Degrassi, like Giacomo Degrassi and the Degrassi Sisters. I wonder Degrassi on Degrassi Street.
Yeah, that'd be how many cross-generational, how many time-traveling things can you create there?
Yeah, and that's part of why I'm like Degrassi in the hashtag, because like I wonder, because you never know what people's nerderies cross.
No, you
right?
don't.
And it's not fair for me to assume that someone who watches Degrassi junior high, or I forget what iteration.
High, I think now
is it Degrassi High now?
High.
And Degrassi Western martial arts are going to cross. You never know.
Well, you never know,
So reading the Degrassi treatise, and at one point too, I was just like, I'm just so tired, and there's stuff that I have to do for the show. So I was talking with my liaison at Pocket Live, and going, I kind of have to do this, but is that going to be interesting? Because it's not. I was thinking at first like visual and movement, and she's like, no, as long as you're still interacting with your audience to a degree. But also because what you're doing is part of your process in your life. She's like, I think that's totally interesting. So I just had the camera over my shoulder, looking at my book while I'm making my notes and going through and doing stuff. I'm like, this is part of the book work of being an actor. Like this is me sitting down doing the brain stuff. Like it's got to be moving and in my body, but there's for my personal process, there is a certain amount of it that just has to be sitting, reading, and just truly reading what's there, reading it really closely. Yeah. So that was a new discovery for how many people were actually interested in that process. I think that's been the biggest discovery for me, is people what they actually want to see and what they actually find interesting.
There's a lot of I was listening recently to there's a podcast called The Block Type, and it's a designer podcast. Like, he's a Toronto designer.
Oh, cool!
But he's been doing a bunch of stuff lately called what's it called? It's called the Bellows.
Oh,
he's the what is this podcast called? Anyway, type something. Anyway, the Bellows Title Block is the name of the podcast. In case anybody's interested, podcast for the win, you guys. Canadian theater podcast for the win. So the Title Block is really about design and designers in theater.
Michael Cruz. Okay.
But there's also the Bellows is, so the one that got me was media relations. So he had like Steve Fesher and Sue Edworthy and a couple of other people
very
talking
good
about like promotion and stuff for the theater. And one of the things they were talking about is process and how the general public doesn't actually know what happens in the room, and how like giving a glimpse into that can be just fascinating for them. Like the idea that they could sit and find out, what happens behind the scenes as they're doing this thing. Now it might be completely boring, but the idea is that, like, for them, it might be completely fascinating.
Yeah, it's like, what are they talking about? Yeah.
And so you've got this, like, your process is like pulling back the curtain on some of that stuff.
And I think that's another one of those, like, because at the beginning we're like, it's in a way it's about the product, it's about what the audience gets to see and what we prepare for the audience. So I think there's a lot of us out here who are hesitant to first lift that, thinking that, oh no, it's not done, what will they think of me? As opposed to, knowing that the audience gets that it's not done yet.
But there's something to be said for those behind the scene things. Like, I see videos like some show opening on Broadway. Here's a behind the scenes look, and they'll have a couple of the actors talking about whatever, or they'll, maybe a little moment from rehearsal, or what did this song and dance number look like when they were rehearsing it in the studio, as opposed to what now. Or recently, like Hugh Jackman doing ADR for the Logan movie, and people are like, that's like fascinating. So this is what actually happens. Fascinating shit, and people are actually like interested in like what goes on behind the scenes, like pulling back that curtain. We don't have to, like, they're gonna, if they come to see the thing, they'll see the finished product, but like seeing the early stages can be really fascinating for people too, I think. I remember, I forget who I was talking to. We were talking about the idea of, actually maybe it was part of what we were talking about with fundraising and such. The idea of when people get a chance to see more of it, then they have a more personal connection with it. Whether it's in a case of like a crowdfunding thing where they have something, or they're let's say one of your rewards is sitting in on the first read. They have a sense of more of a sense of ownership, more of a sense of discovery with the piece. I also think like treating some of that behind the scenes stuff as sort of like in a documentary style, like where you don't have to think about the presentation. Be honest. If this scene is not going well, like, say it. Like, this is like, we're working on this thing, those sorts of like human moments that make the audience who's watching that sort of like be there with you, which is terrifying to think, like, oh, the scene isn't going well, they're going to think it's garbage. But then maybe they won't. Maybe. I'm this faraway look in my eyes that the listeners can't see is me thinking about that moment where, like, for instance, recently Stratford released a behind the scenes of Guys and Dolls, essentially like a teaser of come and see this, and the rehearsal that they show looks pretty polished, and there's lots of big tricks and big impressive things, which is lovely. And part of me goes,
that's a fairly finished scene just out of costume.
Yeah.
As opposed to like another version maybe we have where you're saying like this scene just isn't working. But then I thought about those wonderful moments that we do have in rehearsal where it's like everyone knows, but everyone's there.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, oh, that didn't work. Oh, let's do that again.
Yeah. Well, that was terrible. Let's try that again. One of the things that might have been fascinating for that Stratford Guys and Dolls thing would have been like, what about whenever, like, teach people how to play craps?
Yeah.
Right? That's one of the things you have to do if you're doing Guys and Dolls is learn how to play craps.
Yeah. Or at least have an understanding that when he says this number, you're really upset about that.
Yeah. But I think, like, I remember being there years ago for one of the backstage tours, and they had, like, it was a Sunday, so nobody was rehearsing. And we were walking around, they were rehearsing Guys and Dolls. And it's all these books, like, people leaving books, like, where they were. It was just, like, the rules of craps. And there was, like, a well-worn book as people are going through trying to learn this game. Craps
is complicated.
Yeah.
I had to learn some craps for Hogtown as well. Yeah. But
just, like, that's sort of, like, this is part of what goes into this. We have to learn this fucking game, you know?
Yeah.
So here's how it goes. You do this. Like, explain it, like, to the camera.
Yeah.
Okay, now you try it, you know? This is what we have to remember. So that kind of fascinating, like, behind-the-scenes stuff.
Yeah. Huh.
And now, of course, we're, like, as you and I always do, we're, like, way off where we were intending to go. Because that's just what...
It's just, yeah. Ooh.
Oh, don't worry about it. I mean, one of the things that we did want to talk about was intimacy for the stage.
Yeah.
Which, as somebody who does fight choreography I mean, among all the other things that you do, you're a fight teacher, a fight choreographer, a fighter. Intimacy is not that different from fighting. Mm-mm. But we don't tend to think of it that way.
No, I think, yeah. Well, I think there's a certain group of people who get that they're very similar, but I get this all the time where I go, I know a thing and then I forget that other people don't know it.
Right.
Which is something, which as a teacher is something that I have to keep actively reminding myself. But I have these moments where I go, well, of course they're the same thing, because it's choreography. And even in the approach to the material, it's very sensitive material for people. It can be full of triggers. It can also just be full of trepidation. Yeah. Like, I don't know what my response to violence is. Yeah. I have no experience. How do I act this? Yeah. I don't even know where to get started. Yeah. I have my own experience with intimacy, but how is that going to translate? Who's going to judge me on that? Yeah. Because so much of human existence is about who am I attractive to, who am I attracted to. Yeah. I'm not attracted to anybody, and until recently that just wasn't a thing you would admit.
Yeah.
So
it's interesting because I think the idea of like intimacy choreography takes away that nervousness going into, like Lorena was saying, is being like, okay, so then they do what on stage? Okay, I have to, like, I don't even know how this is going to go down. Like, to know that there's going to be, like, some kind of, somebody's going to show us how to do that. And so we don't have to worry about, like, awkwardness of, like, how about I do this? No? Okay, how about...
Can I put my hand? It says, there's, like, stage direction says, like, A fondles so-and-so's B.
Yeah.
And, like, the word fondle immediately kind of puts your back up. I was like, I have to fondle you now. Yeah. Because most people have that sense of, I don't want to violate this person. I don't want to make the rehearsal hall uncomfortable. Yeah. And I had a colleague contact me and was asking, like, we've left the scene to last. And I don't know what they're going to do. I mean, I trust the director, but the director feels very new at some of the stuff, and we've been talking about it kind of, but not really. So we've left this to last, and I just don't want to go in there only trusting other people to do it for me. Which is a different opinion, of course, from the people who are like, I trust my director. I will with abandon trust my director, knowing that they will do something. And saying that with all the hope of that, but none of the belief.
Yeah, yeah.
So sometimes it's really just a matter of having the vocabulary of being able to say, let's just talk about consent for a second.
Yeah.
Let's just talk about, I'm okay with this. Let me take your hand and put it right here. That I think maybe that works for me.
Yeah.
But also, like, what's that story-based approach to it? As far as intimacy choreography is concerned, a lot of times what you hear about happening is like, okay, then just kiss. There you go.
Yeah.
There's no talk about all the various storytelling points that you can have in that moment that we really lose when we don't take a moment in the rehearsal to go, well, what's the story of this moment? Because it's 2 words, they kiss.
Yeah, and so that you just go, well, I guess...
Then I put my face on your face, and then, like... Similarly, again, to me, this is why... Those of us in Intimacy Directors International, while we're talking about this, we kind of go, well, we don't want to keep talking about it like fight choreography because we all happen to be fight directors as well. But the parallel works for us because it is really a similar process in the choreographic approach to it.
I think that the parallel works for anybody who's familiar with the idea of fight choreography.
But also dance choreography, right?
Yeah.
Like, there is a dance. It's like, oh, here's some music, then dancing happens.
Yeah.
And if you just have someone who's like, I've done some dance before, let's do Hichiku Ball Change Jazz Square.
Yeah.
Is a very different approach than someone who has a vast vocabulary and goes, what's the tone of this? What's the story of this? Where are we getting to? What do our characters care about right now? And actually expressing that in the movement.
Where did the intimacy choreography idea come from? Do you know where the start of that is?
I will paraphrase. So my mentor in this, Tonya Sina, was doing her degree. She was also training as a fight director at the time, but she was looking at movement and choreography, and something was happening in various scenes that were being done in other people's directing projects, and like, oh, there's some like kissing and touching going on here. Does somebody want to choreograph that? And she leapt at the opportunity. And again, this is the very short version of it. From there, it pretty much sort of grew. She recognized a need and went, this is something that people need to have an intelligent approach for, and not this sort of haphazard, well, I am brave and I will enter, which is also commendable as an artist, but being brave and entering can be made smarter by having some of the details. It's like, I can be brave and try to climb Mount Everest, but I bet you'll have better success if I draw on the expertise of others on the way. And what Tonya does as well is, what she's been developing over the last couple decades is also not just this is choreography, but there's also an approach to the work. Because intimacy for the stage, when you're performing intimacy, can be very exposing emotionally, not just physically for people, but also, let's say there is nudity. There is a lot of personal danger in that. A lot of emotional danger in that. So part of what Tonya does is it's about her approach to it, about how do we get actors to communicate with each other? How, as a choreographer, do I manage, for lack of a better word, the rehearsal itself? How do I communicate with the people? Where do I place myself physically in the room? What kind of tone do I bring to the room? So that everyone feels safe. And I wish I remember, or actually knew who said this, but I heard recently, a rehearsal space should be somewhere safe that dangerous things can happen, as opposed to a dangerous place where only safe things will happen. So I, as an intimacy choreographer, how do I come in and create a safe space so that we can really explore these things that can feel quite dangerous? So a lot of Tonya's work is very much about that entire negotiation, not just the approach to the choreography itself. And you can really see a difference in a room. And I'm sure you've experienced it with other stuff where you've got a director who's a little bit, as you will make a very different kind of tone of a room as opposed to someone who's maybe very jovial or is everybody's buddy or is very much like the benevolent dictator. Like that creates very different tones. So it's making choices about what tone we enter the room with, reading the people who are there. If they are really actually totally cash about it, and then they don't need a lot of they don't need the space created for them, then that's a different process than a room where everyone's like, I have no idea how this is going to go. We have to simulate sex today. Or even if, because again, intimacy is also not just bikini bits next to each other. It's also like parent to child. It's also best friends. Let's say it's a scene where two friends haven't seen each other forever, and that's a very tender, vulnerable, loving moment. So how do we allow that to live and breathe? How do we create a hug that tells that story? Because it's a very different thing than, two buddies who saw each other like last month.
Yeah. Where is your starting place for that kind of work?
So reading the room has a lot to do with it. Also, keeping in mind the appropriateness of things like language, dress. It's a little bit about presentation as well. But it's very much about what's the text calling for? What is the work? So that we can help to distinguish between what's the storytelling issues we're dealing with and what are the personal things that are maybe things we need to negotiate in order to have the work happen well. Let's say it is a scene where clothes have to come off and someone's really self-conscious about their belly. So maybe we don't take any clothes off in the first rehearsal. Because that's not important to the storytelling at this point.
Right.
And so a lot of it is discussing what this moment calls for, what's come before, what has to happen afterwards.
Right.
And then the specifics of how we can tell that story. And it's, again, very much like who are the actors in front of me? How are they interpreting these characters? And so how do we tell this story with these people? Like one pair of Romeo and Juliet is going to be different than another set of Romeo and Juliet.
Right.
Because maybe they're different ages, maybe they're playing it more impetuously than others, or maybe these folks are really more just horny teenagers. I say just. That's very judgmental sounding. Maybe they're playing it as super horny teenagers, so they're both says, "Oh, I'm mashing faces."
Yeah.
And as long as that's the story you're interested in telling, then that's a great choice. So how do we tell that safely? I mean, also physically, if you're going to play two characters who just want to mash their faces against each other, how do you do it without breaking teeth?
Well, there is that. That's a logistic that actual teenagers don't probably think about. But
but when you have to do it again and again,
do it every night.
Yeah. And twice on Saturdays.
The idea. Is there a resistance to the idea of like an intimacy choreographer?
Sometimes. Some directors are like, no, I can do that myself. Some directors are, wow, amazing, I don't have to deal with it.
Yeah.
But some directors really like to have their own view of the whole room. And they don't want anyone else's touch on what's going on. And I totally respect that. That's the way they want to run their rehearsal. Fantastic. Yeah. Sometimes there is pushback from actors as well, who are like, I don't need you telling me how to do my job.
Yeah.
Because they see it as maybe an imposition as opposed to a discussion.
Right.
But that also depends on the choreographer going in. Like if someone is going in and is like, all right, we're going to do it this way today, and maybe they think what they're doing is like having positive, upbeat energy. Maybe the way it's received that day is, all right, you're doing it wrong. I'm going to tell you how to do it the right way. Yeah. So again, like reading the room is so important. But that's where you do get some pushback from the performers themselves when they're like, I've been doing this for many years. I've got this part figured out. So that's the thing.
That's great if all of the people involved in the intimacy are in that same boat. If all of them are in like, yeah, we've been doing this for years, and we're comfortable with it. We've got this figured out. But if one of the other people is not there, then you have an uneven stage relationship.
Yeah, and that's where, and I think that happens with everything too, right? Where you've got, let's do some close work on this scene, and one person's like, I got this scene, I know exactly what's going on, and they end up being there in a way in support of the other people in that scene. But in that way, then you go, okay, cool. So you don't feel you need an intimacy choreographer. Let's your job then is to just be confident in the movement, and then allow the outside eyes to continue to adjust the full picture. Yeah. And I wonder if that's where some of the pushback comes from. Is the they haven't necessarily thought before about how the third eye sees it really differently. it's a reminder that we all need sometimes. Like, time passes differently on stage than it does in the audience. In the same way, our perception of what's happening from the inside is different than what the audience is seeing. Yeah. And you can't rely on like, oh, I feel that impulse tonight, because it means that the story changes. And then let's say, you and your co-star have been doing this passionate kiss this way one day, and then one performance, someone goes, oh yeah, and then I'm gonna grab their butt or something, and then suddenly there's
everything off.
that can throw your, and it's different than having just a slightly different expression of the text one day. Let's say that person just doesn't like being touched there, or has for whatever reason that feels like a kind of violation. Then they're off for the rest of the performance, and sure, you're going to deal with it and still say the things, but it's a different kind of pushing somebody around than what's what's acceptable within the, we are being these people in this situation, as opposed to, now I've provoked the actor.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's always well, not always, but I think everybody's heard a horror story of an intimate scene that went wrong or felt wrong, but they didn't feel like they were empowered to do anything about it. Like, they were stuck doing this scene that felt like a violation.
Yeah. I myself have been incredibly lucky. The worst is that I was doing a scene and I had to kiss somebody, and I was like, why am I giggling like a 12-year-old? Like, I feel like an idiot. But yeah, some people have not felt empowered to speak up and say, I don't feel right. But not necessarily feeling like really innately understanding that we can have a difference between what the characters need to do and the actor feeling violated. Like, you can do what the character needs to do, and you yourself, the actor, can feel safe at the same time. And that's part of some of the education that's going on with Intimacy Directors International, because it's helping people understand that vocabulary. Like, as I mentioned, I had a colleague that wrote to me, and she just said that having the vocabulary to talk about what's the scene work here, so that if something was sort of going a direction that she didn't agree with artistically, that she didn't agree with because her personal boundaries were being pushed, because we had talked about it, she said that she had a sense that she could tell those two things apart. Where sometimes when you have a warning bell going off, you don't know what it is.
No.
Because maybe it is only artistic, but you feel awkward, and the more you do the thing, you're like, I feel wrong. Yeah. And maybe what was a disagreement on storytelling then becomes something that feels really personal, and then the whole thing is sort of becomes off.
Yeah.
But people being empowered to, or even then having the vocabulary and understanding that, okay, maybe it is that you feel personally violated, but you don't want to talk about it. Maybe it is a matter of going, well, let's talk about the story of this, and you can negotiate your way around the thing that is a personal trigger for you.
Yeah. We don't often, it's one of those things that, I've had so many conversations in theater about the story of the fight.
Yeah.
When it's a good choreographer, sometimes it's like, this is going to look cool. But, for the most part, it's like we talk about the story of the fight.
Yeah.
But it's like you were saying, usually when you get to the romantic part, it's just like, put your face together.
Yeah.
And then we move on. And nobody ever talks about what's happening in that moment. And so, that moment, especially the first time, when we have to do that, becomes fraught. Because in that moment, I don't know about you, but I've had moments where I'm like, I have to do this thing, and the character's doing it, but I'm having difficulty separating myself from this moment, and now I'm like feeling like awkward and weird. Like, it's that weird moment where it's like, you're the actor, I'm playing a part, but I'm also me, and you know that I'm me, and we're doing this thing, and now I'm just like, I'm feeling so awkward, and not having like that discussion or any underlying anything about it.
And those moments of like, well, let's say you're doing a show, and like, humans are humans, and as much as people don't want to admit it, sometimes we are also just animals sometimes. And your body and your chemicals are going to do things. And if you haven't had any kind of discussion on the storytelling versus the actor, you may start to confuse, and that's that's where a lot of showmances come from, is that people just happen to be together, and they're touching each other, and they're doing things that are meant to read to the audience as though they're feeling good, so they're probably actually feeling good to a certain degree, and you get confused.
Also, like, those things it's like when people say you don't feel good, smile, you'll feel better.
Yeah.
It's like that sets off the chemical in the brain, makes you feel like you're feeling a thing.
Yeah.
And the showmance happens, and it's great until the show ends, and that's not happening anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. So part of being able to talk about the intimacy as a choreography and addressing that very thing where it's like, this is going to feel great. Mm-hmm. And remember that it's not real. Yeah. Now, if something genuine comes up, then that's great. Yeah. But for it to happen in every show you're in, there is, I endeavor to say, there is something there that needs to be, don't take your work home with you. Mm-hmm. And that's a bit harsh, maybe.
It may sound a little bit harsh, but I mean, it's true, because those...
Tag out, go home.
Those showmances, I mean, I don't know any that have worked out. There may be some.
I think there's a couple, like they are out there, but for the vast majority of them, I mean, it's a thing. Like, we call them showmances. Exactly. Even in that word, we diminish them in a way, going, oh yeah, that hormone thing that happens.
Deep down, we know what they are.
Yeah.
Maybe the people involved in it, but, we know what they are. And then to have them happen all the time, it's like, no, maybe we need to be doing something different.
Yeah, it's like, do I need to keep changing my life every time I change shows? Like, let's say that you're the type that's always the lead, that's always some manner of romantic lead. Like,
that means that every time you do a show, you are falling in love, moving in, like having a relationship, and then as soon as that show ends, you're breaking up and going on to the next.
Yeah, thing. And if that's a lifestyle you're happy with, then great. But I wonder about the emotional wear and tear that takes on a person. And what about a time when you are ready to be with one person, you want to have something solid, but you're in the practice of falling in love and being with that one person. Like and I just thought of the deeper implication too of if you're always falling in love in that fashion, the act of falling in love in a different context would be kind of foreign. Not that you're not going to see it, but in my mind, I kind of go, "What? That would be a really different experience." And I wonder, for someone who is a serial showmancer, what that might mean for their building relationships in other fashions. It's very curious, philosophical question.
Very interesting philosophical
more
question.
Than anything. But back to the original idea of putting it down and taking it home. There's a certain amount of recognition. So let's go back to like the like naked intimacy. Let's say when you are doing sex scenes and stuff, those can get really awkward because suddenly you're like, now my body is doing things and my human animal is doing the things that it's supposed to do. But having the discussion of, well, sorry if I do, sorry if I don't. It's not a personal. It's not a personal thing. It's just that our chemical systems work well together, or our chemical systems don't work well together. Yeah. So those things aren't happening. But it's not an insult to you. I don't mean it in any way. I personally think you are lovely, but my body doesn't want to reproduce with you necessarily. Like it's not something that needs to make the work awkward.
Right.
Because we've talked about it, because we've addressed it. We can be like, oh yeah, that's just a thing.
The things that it's almost as though we should have been talking about this for many, many years previous to this.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate that we're really only starting to have these conversations now.
And part of the reason I dove into studying with Tonya and working on getting her up here to Canada to do some work with us here was because I was like 30 and had this experience of having to kiss someone at a show and giggling like a 12-year-old. And I'm like, why am I an idiot? I'm a professional. I am an adult. I'm a married woman, and I have put my face on people's faces before in shows. Why is this one different? Mm-hmm. And I just felt like such an idiot. Yeah. But for whatever reason, that particular one, just my subconscious was doing things, and I was like, I was in some ways just really embarrassed that this was being so bizarre. Everyone in the room was lovely, and we all had a great little giggle about it.
Of course, yeah.
But it does seem odd sometimes that how are we talking about this? Or to talk about it, we kind of go, well, yeah, isn't that what everybody knows? And then secretly we're like, oh, good, we're talking about it.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. It takes a lot of the pressure off of those scenes, like to have that conversation and not have that conversation be like had with the director saying, all right, so you two work on the scene, like go into the other room and work on the kiss or something.
Because then it puts the pressure on the actors, like, you're not hot enough.
Yeah.
Like, it subconsciously becomes this judgment.
Yeah.
Also, then you make it personal.
Exactly.
Go hide somewhere
hide
and get sexy together.
Alone, be sexy,
Like,
and then come back here and show us your
Do you
sexy.
tell your actors to go away? Just go punch each other for a
Yeah.
bit and then come back with a great fight scene.
Yeah.
Or go ballroom dance together and then be brilliant at this choreography.
Yeah. No.
Like, it's... And then it's also not... technically, then it's also not rehearsal. There's no stage manager with you.
Yeah.
There's no director. It's you rehearsing on your own time.
That gets really awkward, and that's where that showmancy thing
Tends
is in that
to
dangerous.
pop up. And that's so that's one of the cardinal rules, you could say, one of our pillars of safe choreography is making sure that it's it always stays within the realm of the professional rehearsal.
Yes. Yeah.
So that it's not allowed to become awkwardly personal, because there's a third party watching, going, yes, the audience is perceiving this, and then the actors generally are able to go, okay, that worked. How did that look? And if they're feeling awkward themselves, they can kind of defer that energy and go to the outside line and go, did that work? I felt awkward. Do I look sexy?
Yeah.
Or does this tell what we need to tell? Because subconsciously, if the actor doesn't believe that it works, they will subconsciously do things with their bodies that belie how awkward they feel.
Yeah.
Things like, okay, you can't see me, I'm doing it right now. Shoulders rolling forward. Yeah. Anything that you see that we parallel with, that indicates to us low self-esteem. So things like hiding down, making yourself smaller, or even something really simple like just rolling the shoulders forward and collapsing the chest a bit reads as, if I'm kissing someone while I'm doing that, there's a subconscious pulling away, as opposed to like when I open up my neck and when I open my chest and sort of allow that person into my personal space. If I'm at all feeling awkward when I'm performing that scene, those little subconscious cues are those things where when people are watching intimacy in theater, when they're watching it performed, where they go, I just don't believe it. Why we all feel awkward? Like the audience feels weird. Yeah.
So what does education look like for the intimacy directors? Like how does the education that's happening take place?
It's at this point it is definitely a growing process. It's something that Tony's been working on for years, and we're just looking to formalize it because we're also very conscious of, we don't want this to become like some kind of exclusive club, but we do want to be specific about who we recommend for this work. We're also not looking at calling it like certification or anything, but we really want to go, well, these are people that we agree on appropriate rehearsal methods. So what does the education look like, as it were? Things like how does one manage a room? What kind of confidence, what kind of tone do you bring into it? It's also some very simple biomechanical things of like what I said. This is what the body does when it's aroused. This is how we do things like hide away. It's also a lot about reading people. So when I walk into a room, again, in that way, it's a lot like fighting. When I walk into a room, do I see who doesn't really like each other? Who's involved in this scene? How do they feel about each other? Yeah. Are they like, I'm very professional and I know what I'm doing, but secretly I'm really terrified, or I trust the other people in the room? Or when you're in the middle of the work and suddenly you see someone shut down, someone said something, we've done something, so you recognize that and go, okay, that person's just had a trigger. Yeah. So how do I negotiate around that? Do I ask them about it? Like, is it the kind of thing where I need to go, are you okay with this? Yeah. Or is it the kind of thing where they would probably rather not talk about it and we just find another way to do that? So in that way, it's about the reading the room. It's also some basic stagecraft of, like, from a director's perspective, what does this scene need? Where is it supposed to go? All those questions, and having a handle on all that kind of work as well. Right. But it is a developing process. So listeners, you should check out intimacydirectorsinternational.com, and that's where, as the work grows and as our gathering, our collection of like-minded professionals, as it grows and as we continue to define what we feel these prerequisites are, that information will be there and you can connect with us there.
Is there something that you wish that performers, directors, stage managers knew about this process beforehand?
it's storytelling, and it really is about looking at how we can create a movement piece, as it were, that tells the story that we're looking for. It's not personal, because as we were talking about before, the current practice tends to be a little bit about, you're not hot enough, I'm not buying it. This isn't working. And fewer people have a sense of how we clarify that. So going into it, just having a sense of this is a movement piece, and there are lots of little things, and just like any other piece of slightly complicated blocking, it's not going to be perfect on the first day, and it may take some warming up to get into it. Also, don't asking an intimacy choreographer to come in and give you a hand is in no way diminishing one's own expertise as an artist. It is a specialty, and as much as directors absolutely have a sense of the human spirit and this person's experience, calling in someone to take a look at this really specific moment is not about relinquishing control of your show or saying, I'm not good enough, or anything else that implies a lack. What it really is just deferring a particular moment to a specialist that can do something probably quicker than you yourself can. Because this is what we spend our time doing, this is what we study.
It's the kind of thing, you wouldn't think twice about bringing in a dance choreographer or hopefully a fight choreographer.
God willing.
Hopefully. We've had that conversation before.
Yes.
But it's very similar to those sorts of things.
Yeah, it's something that is really quite personal for people. So, know that, if you call me in to do some intimacy choreography, know that I understand that. And it's, I absolutely respect every person in the room. I'm not going to come in and try to top dog the room or something. I'm also not going to come in and be like, all right, so today we're going to choreograph the intimacy. It's a professional coming in and doing some choreography. I think if it was just one thing, then that would be it. We can just take a breath, choreograph some movement, and know that we've got a handle on what's the audience going to see, and we want everyone to feel good. We want everyone to feel confident while we're doing this.
Well, that's really the thing, because I think there've been a lot of times when I've seen a show when people are not confident. And, you go into the scene and everybody's like, this is the part I hate. You can sort of see, the actors being like, a little awkward, but let's put our faces on each other.
Yeah.
It's or worse,
now I want a t-shirt with just, two awkward faces near each other.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
But that's sometimes what it feels like, right? Yeah. Sometimes what it feels like is, this is the part where we are supposed to kiss.
Yeah, and there's just sort of because it seems to, in a way, you could categorize the extremes of, there's this bracing for it.
Yep.
Or this all right, here we go. The running up towards it, where you can see in both of those extremes of discomfort, you can see the actors all right, here's this thing that we haven't really talked about, but we kind of need to do. And it's but there's no other word, this climactic moment where a thing is happening. And it's a story plot as well. So it's important and it has to happen. Or we do the Star Trek, we cradle people and walk them out of the room and go, blah, blah, stuff yada, yada, yada. Which is also, in a way, unsatisfying if you don't have the lead up to it. If we don't believe that those characters are going to go off and do that thing, then we're we're losing the story opportunity. And that's the thing that hits me the hardest, or the thing I've noticed the most in my last years of studying this is, in my several years of studying this now, is it's the story that gets lost when we don't give it the time. I know it's only 2 words in the script, but you kind of need to give it enough time.
It's 2 words in the script, but how often is they fight just 2 words in the script? Right? So it needs a little bit of something.
Yeah.
Is this all the kind of stuff that I wish has been conversations that we've been having for a lot longer. I remember doing a show myself years ago where there was a wedding and the person I was supposed to be marrying in a group wedding, Shakespeare,
Oh, yeah. It's like,
and it's a comedy, so a bunch of people get married, right?
Yeah.
I tried to explain that to my girlfriend once. Oh, I know. This one is actually technically a comedy. They get married at the end. And she was like, what the fuck are you talking about? And I was like, no, it's this thing. But so it's like one of the comedies, and everybody gets married at the end.
Right.
And everybody's supposed to kiss. And my partner in the scene was like, no, I have a boyfriend. I'm not going to do that. And I'm like, okay. We probably should have had a conversation around that before the director said, and everybody kiss. And she just sort of like said, no, I'm not. Like there was no conversation about it. So it was like at odds with the director, at odds with the actor, that sort of thing. And it just, if we'd been able to have conversations about that sort of thing, like from day one, then we could have come up with some way that kind of worked better than whatever was happening at the time.
Yeah, and it actually comes around to that question of consent as well, and also like accepting the job. Or making it known at the beginning that I really want this role, but I don't kiss other people on the mouth in shows. That's just not a thing I do.
Yeah.
And so that the director can either approach it with, great, you're amazing for this role. We'll find another way to tell that moment.
Yeah.
So it's not sort of a surprise, and it can be part of a wonderful moment.
Yeah.
And again, that's where an intimacy choreographer might take some of the pressure off, because it's like, oh, how's another way that we can tell this moment of intimacy without having to use the traditional trope, I dare say, of I put my face on your face.
Yes. Yeah. This is like, you got to get that on a button or something. I put my face on your face.
I put my face on your face.
Yeah, it's just like, can you make that sound more awkward?
It's because of Lin Lum, and she's like, oh, he's so handsome, I won't put my mouth on his mouth. Like, it just makes me so happy.
Yeah.
It makes me laugh, because sometimes it's just like, I just want to eat like an apple. Like, nom.
But then again, that's stuff that's great if both people want to eat the other's face like an apple.
Yeah.
But if one person is like, I want to eat your face like an apple, and the other one is like, whoa, slow down.
Whoa.
We have to get on the same page there.
Raspberries.
Unless that's the scene.
Yeah. So
These conversations that have to be had.
Amazing. Yeah. Oh boy. Oh yeah. But speaking of which, that moment of like, oh, I don't kiss people. Being that actor also being able before that to feel empowered to say, this isn't something I do, but here's some other great options, or let's chat about this beforehand. So it's like, even if it's to the fellow actors, like, hey, I don't kiss people in the mouth, but so let's come up with another really tender moment of maybe you kiss my hand, or maybe you stroke, or we.
And that could have all been stuff that was a conversation. Instead, we kind of stood there awkwardly, which was like, because she said, no, we're not going to do that, and so it was just like, all right, so everybody else does it, and we just stand there.
But now my brain goes like, if the two of you look at the others and then look back at each other and are like, like, oh, guess what's going to happen on our own time?
That could have been a moment, but again, we would have had to like discuss that and like make the choice and things like that, which was not happening.
As opposed to in a run, suddenly you're like,
so we don't do that. Okay, it's basically like
twiddling thumbs, whistling a little.
Yeah.
And it comes back to, again, these conversations that we just haven't really had much. Like, what are those alternatives? And the idea being, you are well within your rights to say, I don't do that. That is a personal choice, but that doesn't affect the quality of my art. It just means that I do it in a way that maybe you don't expect.
And it's perfectly valid to do that, but it's something, again, we have to be able to talk about it.
You have to be able to talk about it.
I kind of feel like one of the reasons why these conversations haven't been happening is because a lot of directors have been dudes, and a lot of leading men, because their men are dudes, and it turns into like, no, okay, so she's hot, so now I get to kiss her, or whatever, and I think there's some sexual politics involved in that, or have been involved in that. And that's why those conversations haven't been happening.
I know Tony's got lots of stories.
I'll bet she does.
For this. And as the work of Intimacy Directors International and intimacy directors and choreographers in general becomes more of a discussion and more of an accepted practice, it's interesting to see where the pushback comes from, whether it's male directors or female directors, or what kind of pushback you get from people, or what kind of open arms you're accepted with. I know Tonya has announced it so that I can say it. She will be intimacy directing for the Bacchae at Stratford this year. And that's a very woman positive show.
Yeah.
So that's one where it was like, oh, this is wonderful. Let's talk about this. Let's build a relationship. Yeah. As opposed to other situations where it's like, no, I got it. We don't need you.
Yeah, of course.
And I'm not saying not to imply any particular theater company in that. That's certainly not. But various situations where it's been like, no, we got this. It's fine. They'll just kiss.
Yeah.
Or in other situations, I've had directors, as I said, who are like, oh, thank goodness. And you do get little surprises of like, oh, that's a very dude, like that's a very bro kind of person. I would have expected them to be really precious about it, but they're not. But yeah, if I may say from anecdotal evidence, it can be those people who are either very protective about being the director in the room, or dudes who don't see it as a problem.
Yeah, of course they don't.
Yeah,
of course they don't.
Yeah. Because if you can't see it, you don't actually understand it's a problem, and you can't see people's awkwardness.
We're having this conversation on International Women's Day when this sort of thing should be talked about.
Yeah.
And about how the gender politics and gender politics in theater have played out for many years, and how the dudes, the bros, the guys, there has been a history of
railroading,
of guys putting women in situations that they don't want to be in.
And let's talk a little bit about bystander stuff too, where it's not just the people in the scene, but it's also other people who are in the rehearsal feeling like they're not allowed to speak up because they feel like it's not their scene, or it doesn't really affect them. Not knowing who they can go to, or even the stage manager being, if they don't feel empowered to speak up and be like let's take 5, or this is getting really tense, not knowing how to diffuse or to move the situation along. Like everyone in the room feeling awkward in some manner when they can see something happening, but also it can be really tricky because sometimes you have a person in the scene who's like, no, don't stand up for me, I can do this myself. And that's one thing I find when I'm a fellow performer in rooms, that I find it sometimes can be a bit frustrating, where I'm just like, this is not an energy I can deal with. I can see people are personally upset, and that's where I must admit my usual method is like, not my place. I'm gonna slip out, and as I admit that, I'm a bit like, oh, that's not something I should be doing at all. No. I should be talking to somebody, but not feeling empowered to.
Talk to.
That's a good question.
I mean, it's one of those. Should there be like, I don't know, like some kind of educational seminar for the stage manager so that they can, know how to handle those situations, or like have things that they could do in those situations?
Yes, and I believe that there is, I'm just looking, as I'm furiously looking up the information, I believe that that's part of the aims of the Not in My Space campaign with equity, is the idea of who do I talk to, who can I call? They have educational materials out that you can take a look at. You can also contact a respectful workplace advisor. And this is for any kind of uncomfortable thing. Let's say someone is bullying the rest of the room. I mean, oftentimes it's a director, but maybe it's a particular actor or whatever. For whatever reason, the workspace is awkward. In any fashion. So you can contact a respectful workplace advisor by email, notinourspace@caea.com. And there's also a helpline, 1-800-387-1856. And you can find that information on the Canadian Actors Equity website. There's a whole pilot project. Like I encourage you listeners, no matter where you are in the world, to check it out. It's really exciting that Canadian Actors Equity is moving this direction, because again, it's conversations that we should have been having. There have been certain policies in place, but it's an awareness thing that hasn't been there.
Well, that's the thing, is the policies can be in place, but they only have teeth if they're known.
Yeah,
it doesn't help if there's somebody somewhere who knows the knowledge. More people have to know where to go and what to do in this situation.
Exactly. So yeah, check out caea.com. in under member services, or just click on the Not in Our Space campaign link, and you can see some of the materials they have available. Some of them, there's some great little like bookmark size things where it's like, what can I do? How can I help? Who do I talk to? And there's information on those, so like they're really quick picks of information. But they also have more materials to read as well. Again, check out the numbers that you can call if you're in the middle of a rehearsal process and you're like, I don't know. Yeah. You can call someone. There's always somebody at that phone number to talk to.
This is one of those things that's so important that again, we should have been talking about so long ago, but we're only getting to now. But again, I mean, we're looking at there's a change happening for the better, I think, in the industry in terms of...
And even in the world, honestly, about things that people are able to talk about now or want to talk about now, or not want. That's... No. People feel safe to talk about, talk about, compelled to talk about. People who are like, I won't be silent anymore. This is really important, and I need to live my life in a healthy manner, and this is part of what makes my life healthy. And I'm not going to tiptoe around your norms in order to do that.
Well, it's so important because, I mean, yes, it's art, but it's a workplace.
Yes. That is key.
And it is a workplace. We are doing work in that place, and so we have to have... It has to be a safe place. There can't be bullying. There can't be harassment. There can't be abuse.
And we don't have to, and because the other thing that happens is people have this sense of like, oh, but it's part of the actor's process, or it's part of an artistic process that is painful. You don't have to suffer trauma to make good art.
Trauma. In fact, it's better if you don't suffer trauma to make good art.
A safe space where dangerous things can happen. It's because we can tag out and we don't suffer long-term psychological damage from the work that we're doing. It's not worth it.
No.
I mean, maybe some people feel it is, but guess what? I want to get up tomorrow and be able to feel comfortable and safe in my own skin and go to a new workplace tomorrow. Go back to the same one.
I just think that if you finish your day and you have to go home and curl up in a ball and cry for 3 hours, that maybe something is wrong in the space that you're working in.
Yeah. That said, my colleague Jade Elliott recently choreographed for If We Were Birds in Edmonton, and one of the characters, there's a pretty brutal rape in that script, and this director chose to stage it, whereas in the original staging it wasn't actually staged. But the lead actor in that felt perfectly safe, but was finding that there was like this energy buildup.
Right.
And sometimes it's just the fact that because the material is energetic in a certain way, that a certain kind of self-care was required afterwards. And in this particular case, what worked was like, go home, do 20 minutes on a treadmill, and it actually just expressed that energy. Yeah. And again, that's where someone who has intimacy director training or experience is going to be able to help advise you through those things, because you can be as safe as you want, but sometimes the emotional residue of what we're doing is going to stick with you, and you need to know healthy ways to express that. Again, not taking your work home, because as much as you're like, well, no, I'm a professional, I will leave that there. Yes, you absolutely are. I agree with you. But there is a line sometimes where you're like, my subconscious cannot handle this.
Well,
how do I tag it out?
It's still creating all the chemicals that make it real.
Absolutely.
And so as far as your body is concerned,
it's still happening.
Real.
Yeah.
You might be like, well, I'm just faking it. We're just acting. But your body is like, these are things I'm doing.
Right. I mean, we talked before about the autonomic responses of sorry if I do, sorry if I don't. Yeah. It's no offense. But my body is doing the things that it expects to do in this context. So you are physically experiencing that. Yeah. So it's finding how do you release that? Yeah. And thereby minimize any other trauma. And I wonder how many rehearsal spaces have been affected by those kind of residual energies when we don't notice it building up. Yeah. Like I was doing Mo and Jess Kill Susie, and as much as I did a whole bunch of stuff, like it was like, okay, that was a really hard one. I'm going to go onto the patio and just do some yoga for an hour and just release that. Yeah. But by the end of the run, I was exhausted.
Well, that was a fucking brutal show.
It's pretty brutal.
It's a brutal show. And you're working with Jackie in that, and she starts at a certain emotional place.
Yeah.
And
she's a hostage. She's tied up. She doesn't get to talk for half an hour because she's gagged.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a certain amount of thing. For the people who are doing it, there's certain stuff going. You have to be able to do something with the energy of that.
Yeah. And I guess that's part of it too. It's the acknowledging that it's not just the trauma that we accidentally hold on to. Sorry, I'm saying that poorly. By being able to talk about it, we can then help ourselves understand what is the trauma I'm actually accidentally holding on to, what's the trauma I'm holding on to because I feel like it has to be part of my process,
right.
And where can I find the ease? Like, where can I, what are the things I can let go of and thereby nourish my art and my expression, as opposed to this kind of feels right and I think it's helping me, but again, maybe an outside eye can go, you can drop that particular part of attention. I know it feels good, but you can actually drop that because it's not helping from the outside.
Right.
And then you find you're able to approach it in perhaps a healthier manner. And that's not to say that someone's dictating your process, but they are helping you hone what's going to work for that piece on that day, in that time, with this cast.
It's the same thing as like when your fight choreographer says, when you're waving your sword like that, you don't look like a master swordsman. Hold it a little more like this.
Yep.
You know, it's a similar thing.
It is.
Well, this has been great. Thank you so much for talking with me about this.
My pleasure. Awesome. Love it.